My name is Elena Monroe and I am 35 years old. I had just been told by my stepfather, the man who raised me, that I was never his blood, that I didn't belong in this family. 2 days later, a detective called to say I'd been listed as a missing child for 32 years, and that my real family was a dynasty worth $180 million. For 30 years I'd served the family that wasn't mine. I cleaned my stepmother's blood off the floor when she drank herself half to death. I paid my father's gambling debts. And now, they say I was stolen? But if I'm worth that much, then who the hell stole me? And why? Before I continue, tell me your country and the time right now. I still remember the way the kitchen light flickered when Harold dropped the knife into the sink, not because it was dramatic, but because I was staring at that flicker when he said the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew. You're not my daughter, Elena. You never were. The words didn't hit like lightning. They sank slowly, like poison. I blinked. What? He didn't flinch. I said you're not mine. I thought he was joking. This was Harold, my stepfather, a cruel man with a colder soul than the Vermont winters we lived through. But this? No. This wasn't just mean. This was annihilation. I laughed, stupidly. You're drunk. His eyes were too clear. Not tonight. The floor beneath me turned into liquid. I gripped the edge of the sink for balance. My knuckles turned white. The tiled walls, the dripping faucet, the half-cooked meatloaf on the stove, they all became part of the surreal painting I was trapped in. Then what the hell are you talking about? I whispered. He wiped his hands with a rag, tossed it on the counter, and looked at me the way you look at someone who's overstayed their welcome. You were brought here. I didn't ask for you. You just showed up. Showed up? My voice cracked. Like what, a stray dog? He nodded. Exactly like that. Each word ripped away something from my chest. Mom, she told me, she said. She lied, he said flatly. We needed the money. And you were a paycheck. That's all. I stumbled back like I'd been hit. You're lying. You want the truth, you got it. I stared at him. This man who taught me to ride a bike, who grunted every time I brought home a school award, who used to read the obituaries aloud at breakfast like it was the morning news, he was telling me that none of it meant anything. You changed my diapers. You tucked me in when I had nightmares. He laughed. Yeah, and I regret every second of it. Should have given you to the damn state. I don't remember screaming, but I did. The kind that comes from the bottom of the soul. The kind that shakes the walls and makes your own voice sound like someone else's. I knocked over a chair. A plate shattered. He didn't even blink. You son of a bitch. You're not my problem anymore, he growled. Get out. I stormed to the door, grabbed my coat, my keys, no bag, no phone. I just had to move. I had to disappear. Rain assaulted me as soon as I stepped outside. The storm overhead cracked like God himself had something to say. But I couldn't hear anything except my own gasps, my shoes slapping against pavement, the sound of 35 years shattering behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I walked until my legs couldn't carry me, then drove until I didn't recognize the streets. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of a grocery store. The glow of fluorescent lights cast a pale, sickly haze over the wet concrete. I sat in the car, engine running, hands trembling on the steering wheel. My teeth chattered. Not from the cold. From the wrongness of it all. I wasn't his. I wasn't hers. Then whose was I? I didn't know how long I sat there, soaked to the bone, when someone knocked on my window. My heart leapt. I turned, startled, and saw a man in a long black coat, holding an umbrella. His face was calm, but his eyes were intense, the kind that see through your soul. I rolled the window down a crack. Elena Monroe? He asked. Yes, I replied hesitantly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder. My name is Daniel Graves. I'm a private investigator. I've been looking for you. My brows furrowed. Why? He opened the folder and angled it toward me. Inside were documents, a birth certificate, a hospital wristband, and a missing child flyer. My heart stopped. The photo on it was faded, but unmistakable. The baby had my eyes. My body froze. What is this? That's you, he said, voice gentle, almost apologetic. You were taken from Brigham Hospital in Boston on November 17, 1993. I shook my head violently. No, this is insane. My birthday is in March. I was born in Vermont. No, you weren't. Elena Monroe is the name you were given later. But your birth name is Elena Lennox. You were reported missing at 3 years old. The case went cold. Until now. My vision swam. Someone stole you, he said. And I believe I know who. I couldn't breathe. You're the heiress to the Lennox pharmaceutical fortune. Your real family has been looking for you for 32 years. That was the moment the bottom dropped out of my world. I'm not poor. I blurted, like a child waking up from a nightmare. He almost smiled. Far from it. I clutched the flyer in my hands. My eyes couldn't leave the photo. The baby looked so familiar. The name on the birth certificate. The hospital bracelet. The date. I don't understand, I whispered. Daniel leaned in, his expression serious. Someone didn't want you to be found. Someone in the Lennox family. We believe your disappearance was intentional. My head throbbed. So what now? He handed me his card. Now? We find out who buried your past, and why. A rush of headlights lit up the lot, casting long shadows behind him. For a second, I saw someone watching from across the street. A figure, hooded. Still. Waiting. I looked back at Daniel. Are they dangerous? He nodded slowly. If they went through all this to erase you, they won't let you come back quietly. In the distance, the hooded figure stepped back into the dark. I turned the ignition and looked at the man beside me. Let's go, I said. Let's find out who I really am. The next morning felt like waking up in someone else's body. My reflection in the motel mirror looked familiar, but not mine. I wasn't Elena Monroe. Not the version I'd lived as for 35 years. My name, my memories, my identity, everything was borrowed, maybe even stolen. And apparently, I was the missing piece in someone else's empire. Daniel sat on the edge of the armchair by the window, sipping lukewarm coffee, eyes glued to the documents on his lap. He hadn't slept. I could tell by the bags under his eyes and the way his leg bounced restlessly. The birth certificate from Boston General, he said, holding it up. Original. Date matches the missing child report. Same baby bracelet. It's airtight. I stared at the paper like it might burst into flames. Then why did no one find me before now? He didn't answer right away. That silence told me more than any words could. They filed a death certificate for you, Daniel said finally. 2 years after you vanished. There were signs of foul play. Blood in the hospital's rear lot. The nurse who saw you last died in a car crash 6 weeks later. Case got buried. Sloppy work, or maybe, deliberate. I sank into the motel bed, wrapping the scratchy blanket around me like armor. So what you're saying is, someone wanted me gone. Permanently. Daniel nodded. And they almost pulled it off. I rubbed my temples, trying to process the impossible. You said I belonged to the Lennox family. Who are they? His eyes lifted to mine, steady. Margaret Lennox. Your grandmother. CEO and matriarch. Owns half of East Coast Pharmaceuticals. Your mother was Julia Lennox. She died about a year after you disappeared, or so they claim. So she's gone? My voice cracked on the word. Daniel hesitated. There's reason to believe that story isn't what it seems either. I couldn't breathe for a second. The pressure on my chest felt like someone was sitting on it. Why would anyone do this? Why steal a baby and drop her into a working-class hellhole in Vermont? That's what we're going to find out. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world moved normally, cars passing, birds flying, a woman dragging a toddler into a nail salon. But mine had exploded. My life had cracked open, and beneath the surface was something unrecognizable. I turned back to him. So Harold knew. He had to. He definitely knew, Daniel said. And someone paid him off to keep quiet. Rage surged in my chest. All those years, washing his laundry, cleaning his puke when he drank too much, begging for college money that never came, and the entire time he had known I didn't belong there. You think my mother was in on it too? I don't know, he admitted. But I've seen this before. One parent plays dumb, the other gets paid, and the kid pays the price. The kid. Me. He opened a manila folder and handed me a photo. It was old, grainy, but clear enough. A woman in a pale blue suit with sharp eyes and dark hair held a toddler in her lap, a toddler with curls and dimples in my eyes. That's Julia Lennox, Daniel said softly. And that's you. My knees buckled. I dropped onto the bed again, holding the photo to my chest. So I had a real family. A real mother. You still do, Daniel said. Margaret Lennox is still alive. She's old, but she's powerful. And when she finds out you're alive, things are going to change. What do you mean? She never accepted your death. Refused to declare the estate closed. There's a clause in her will, if you're found alive, you get 50% of everything. I froze. How much is everything? Daniel looked at me grimly. $180 million. At minimum. The air vanished from the room. My ears rang. My body went still. That wasn't just wealth. That was power. And someone had stolen it from me. So if I go back, you don't just show up. You detonate a bomb. Whoever took you, whoever erased your name, they know you're alive now. And they'll come for you. There was a knock on the door. We both froze. Daniel pulled his gun and motioned me back. Stay behind me. He peeked through the peephole. His shoulders relaxed a little. It's just a courier. He opened the door cautiously. A woman in a black windbreaker handed him a small box, no label, no return address. She left without a word. Daniel shut the door and laid the box on the table. He opened it with the end of a pen. Inside, a burned scrap of paper and a single photo. I picked it up. The photo was of me, age 4 or 5, standing outside the house in Vermont. The scrap of paper was part of a birth certificate. Singed at the edges, but visible. The name Julia Lennox was typed next to Mother's name. This was just burned, Daniel said. Someone's trying to cover their tracks. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in smeared ink, you were never meant to come back. My skin prickled. Daniel stepped closer. They know we're looking. Which means we don't have much time. I met his gaze. What do? We go to Boston, he said. Meet your grandmother. Dig up every record. Every lie. Every missing piece. I looked back at the photo in my hand. My childhood was a lie. But now I wanted the truth more than I'd ever wanted anything. They won't let me have it, I said. No, Daniel agreed. But that's where we start fighting back. The sky was bleeding orange when I pulled back into the driveway of the house I once called home. My shoes sank into the slush-covered gravel, wet and heavy, like the memories clinging to every brick of this place. I hadn't come back to forgive Harold. I came to take back what was mine, even if I wasn't sure what that was yet. Daniel waited in the car, watching. He said it was safer if I went in alone. Less pressure. Less visible. But as I stepped onto the porch, I realized I wasn't scared. I was furious. The door was unlocked, the way it always was in this town. Harold sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a deck of cards he wasn't playing. He didn't look up when I came in. "I should have left a long time ago," I said, voice cold and steady. He sighed through his nose, poured himself another 2 fingers. "You back for money?" I laughed bitterly. "You think I need anything from you?" "You're damn right you do," he muttered. "You think they'll take you in with open arms? That rich family of yours? They won't want you. Not after 30 years of trailer park stink on your skin." I stepped closer. "Then why burn my past?" He paused. That hesitation was everything. "Garage fire," he said casually. "Some electrical crap. Lost a bunch of stuff." "You mean you set the fire?" He didn't answer. "Didn't have to." I walked past him, toward the back door that led into the garage. The smell of charred wood still lingered, sharp and acrid. The walls were scorched black, and old tubs of childhood things, my drawings, my school awards, were nothing but ash now. Like someone wanted to make sure no trace of Elena Monroe ever connected to anyone else. But fate had a way of screwing up perfect crimes. Near the back, I found a metal strongbox. Half melted. I pried it open with a crowbar and nearly dropped it. Inside was a birth certificate. Burned at the edges, yes, but legible. My name. Julia Lennox. Boston General Hospital. Blood type, wait, even the nurse's initials. My hand shook. This was it. The last piece. "You didn't do a good enough job hiding me," I whispered. I walked back inside, holding the box like a holy artifact. I slammed it on the table. "Why did you take me?" I asked, heart pounding. Harold finally looked up. Really looked. And for a moment, just a moment, there was regret in his bloodshot eyes. "I didn't steal you," he said. "I just didn't ask questions. They paid me. I did what I was told." "Who paid you?" He shook his head. "I never knew her name. She wore a scarf, glasses. Drove a black car with out-of-state plates. She dropped you off with a box of diapers and said, 'You keep her quiet, she'll make it worth your while.' That was it." I gritted my teeth. "And you never wondered why someone would just hand off a toddler?" "Didn't care," he said flatly. "We needed the money. Your mother, my wife, was dying. You were a ticket." I stepped back like he'd slapped me. Not because of the cruelty, I was used to that, but because of how damn small he'd made my life sound. I walked out without another word. Back in the car, Daniel scanned the document with his phone. "This is enough to start," he said. "We'll get it forensically verified." "Will it hold up in court?" I asked. "If it doesn't, the hospital records will. And if not that, the DNA test will." I exhaled. The kind of exhale that empties your lungs of more than just air. Grief, rage, confusion, all of it flowed out. "Let's go to Boston," I said. The drive took 4 hours, but my mind was far ahead of us. Images raced through my thoughts, the baby photo, the hospital, the forged life I had lived. I replayed every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every scream Harold ever hurled at me. All of it suddenly recontextualized. I hadn't been his daughter. I'd been his insurance policy. By the time we reached the edge of the Lennox estate, snow had begun to fall. The gates were massive, iron-wrought with gilded initials, L. A security booth stood nearby, manned by a uniformed guard with a clipboard. Daniel rolled down the window and handed over a letter. The guard read it, glanced at me, then made a call. Moments later, the gates began to creak open. As we drove through, I pressed my face to the glass. The driveway alone was longer than the entire block I'd grown up on. Manicured trees, gaslit lanterns, stone fountains, it looked like something out of a movie. The mansion emerged through the trees like a monument. 3 stories of colonial stone, black shutters, ivy crawling across its ribs like veins. I felt my stomach knot as we pulled up the circular drive. A man stood at the top of the steps. Tall. Polished. Dressed in a dark tailored coat. His jaw was sharp, his eyes colder than the frost on the windows. He didn't smile. As I stepped out of the car, he spoke, voice smooth as silk, but sharp as a knife. "You should have stayed gone." My blood turned to ice. "And you are?" I asked. "Victor Lennox," he said. "Your brother." He didn't say it like it was a reunion. He said it like a warning. Behind him, the double doors opened. A woman stepped out, older, silver hair pinned in a braid, trembling hands clutching a cane. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something shift in my chest. "Julia," she whispered. "No," Victor said quickly. "It's not her." The woman, Margaret, began to weep. I stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, the wind biting through my coat, my heart hammering in my chest. "Come inside," she said. Victor blocked the door. "She's not part of this family," he snarled. "She is," Margaret said firmly. "She's not proven," he snapped back. Daniel stepped up beside me. "That's what the DNA test is for." Victor's eyes darkened. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, stepping past him. "For the first time in my life, I'm doing what's right." The sterile scent of rubbing alcohol hit me as soon as we stepped into the clinic. It smelled like truth. Like science. Like answers. My palms were sweating despite the cold, and my heart pulsed in my ears so loudly I could barely hear the receptionist ask for my ID. Daniel handed over the paperwork while I stared at the DNA test banner on the wall. Accurate. Legal. Admissible in court. Every word felt like a judge's gavel slamming down, pre-writing the next chapter of my life before I could speak a word. Victor refused to come inside. He stood in the parking lot, arms crossed, talking on his phone like none of this concerned him. But I could feel his eyes on me through the glass, calculating, watching, waiting for something to go wrong. The nurse called my name, and I followed her into the testing room like I was walking toward a firing squad. She was gentle. Swabbed my cheek. Labeled the vial. Smiled at me like it was just another Thursday. But to me, it felt like the moment everything would shift, because if I wasn't Elena Lennox, then I was no one. And if I was, I had no idea what would come next. Back in the waiting area, Daniel sat with his hands folded, unnaturally still. I could tell he didn't trust this clinic, even though we'd verified it twice. Maybe it wasn't the place he distrusted. Maybe it was the power it held, the power to declare me real or erase me completely. 3 days passed. Margaret insisted I stay at the estate while we waited for the results. She gave me a room on the 2nd floor, smaller than the others, she said softly, because the rest had been left exactly as they were the day I vanished. I didn't dare ask to see Julia's. Not yet. The house was a cathedral of memory. Every hallway echoed with footsteps that felt like they should have been mine. Portraits lined the walls, ancestors with piercing eyes and grim expressions. Every Lennox looked like they were about to sue God. Victor avoided me at all costs. But I heard him. On the phone. In the library. Late at night. Always angry. Always whispering. "She's not staying," he said once. I don't care what the test says. But he did care. Because if it confirmed who I was, then everything he controlled, the estate, the company, the money, would fracture. When the call finally came, I was in the garden with Margaret. She was telling me about Julia's favorite flowers, irises, purple and soft, when Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face unreadable. "They're in," he said. Margaret's hand clutched mine so tightly I thought our bones might fuse. We all gathered in the drawing room, Daniel, Margaret, Victor, and me. The air was thick with unspoken history. I sat down slowly, my legs weak, my mouth dry. Daniel opened the envelope with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for funerals. He read silently, then looked up at me. Elena Monroe and Julia Lennox share 99.8% maternal DNA. Match confirmed. She's her daughter. A soft gasp escaped Margaret's lips. Her eyes filled instantly, and she reached for me, pressing her trembling hands to my face. I knew it, she whispered. My girl, you're my girl. I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to cry, to collapse into her arms and feel the weight of belonging for the first time in my life. But another part, the wounded, hardened part, didn't trust it. Not yet. Victor didn't say a word. His jaw clenched, eyes blazing. He stormed out of the room without so much as a glance in my direction. Daniel's voice dropped to a warning tone. It's official. Legally, she has claim to everything the Lennox name entails. Margaret nodded. Then it's time we make it right. That night, I wandered the estate alone. The halls were dim, lit by antique sconces that flickered like they remembered gaslight. I passed a locked door with a gold plaque that read Julia. I stopped. Rested my hand against it. Tomorrow, I whispered. Not tonight. Downstairs, I found the library empty, except for Victor's glass, half full of scotch, still sweating on the table. I shouldn't have touched it. I know that now. But I needed to see what he was hiding. His laptop sat open on the desk. No password. Too cocky, or too careless. Emails. Dozens. One stood out. Subject, Estate Review Strategy, Urgent. From v.lennox@lafarma.com. To harlan@elmsworthlaw.com. Body, if she pushes for legal recognition, we'll challenge the legitimacy. If that fails, we move forward with contingency plan. She can't survive the estate review. Clean it up. I recoiled. He knew. He planned this. Survive the estate review? What did that mean? And what was the contingency plan? I forwarded the email to Daniel, heart pounding, hands shaking. As I backed out of the email browser, I heard footsteps, fast, approaching. I closed the laptop just as Victor walked in. We locked eyes. Lose your way, he asked coolly. I was looking for a book, I lied, praying he didn't notice the sweat on my face. Sure you were. He stepped closer. You may have tricked my grandmother, but you won't last. This isn't some game, little orphan girl. This is blood. This is legacy. I stared him down, pulse roaring. I am blood. He leaned in, voice dropping to a hiss. That doesn't mean you'll live long enough to enjoy it. I didn't flinch. Then you better pray I don't survive. Because if I do, I'm taking everything. 3 days after the DNA results confirmed my identity, the Lennox Estate's legal team summoned me to the West Wing parlor. It was a room built for power, mahogany panels, oil portraits, and a 12-foot-long table with brass inlays that seemed designed for intimidation. Sitting at one end was Margaret Lennox, dignified and composed despite her age. Daniel sat beside me, calm but alert, his fingers resting near the edge of his briefcase as if we might have to run. Victor was already there, dressed like he was headed to war. His suit was sharper than his tone, and he didn't so much as glance at me. But I felt the weight of his fury with every breath I took. The family attorney, a pale, hawk-eyed man named Branson Hale, stood at the head of the table with a folder in his hands. When he spoke, his voice carried no emotion, just the gravity of legal consequence. Now that paternity and identity have been confirmed, he said, we are required to revisit the Lennox estate distribution as dictated in Margaret Lennox's last uncontested will. Victor stiffened, his jaw locking like a trap about to spring. I knew he hated every second of this, but I couldn't help the bitter satisfaction rising in my chest. He had spent decades reigning over something that never fully belonged to him, and now that reign was fracturing. Branson continued, flipping open the folder. Clause 14. In the event that Julia Lennox's daughter, Elena Lennox, is found to be alive, of sound mind, and verified through certified genetic testing, said heir shall receive a 50% share of the Lennox Trust and all associated holdings. The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Victor leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. That clause was never supposed to activate. Julia's daughter was declared dead. The estate has functioned under that legal assumption for 30 years. Margaret's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. And that was a mistake. One we now correct. Victor turned his eyes on her. Mother, with all due respect. None taken, she snapped. You've shown me exactly how little respect you have. He leaned back, seething. This will destroy the company. No, I said, finally speaking. This will restore it. Victor scoffed. You don't know the first thing about this business. Maybe not, I said, my voice steady. But I know what it means to survive. And I know a parasite when I see one. He opened his mouth, but Branson raised a hand. There's more, the lawyer said. In the event of the reappearance of the heir, an estate review must be conducted. All financial activity, asset movement, and board decisions from the last decade will be reopened for audit. That made Victor flinch. I saw it, a flash of something in his expression. Not fear. Panic. Just for a moment. Daniel leaned over to whisper, he's been hiding something. After the meeting, I wandered the estate grounds. I needed air. I needed distance. This world, this cold marble kingdom, didn't feel like it was mine yet. Not really. But somewhere in the quiet hedges and winding stone paths, I imagined a younger Julia walking, maybe even holding my hand. The idea stung, achingly beautiful and utterly painful. That night, in the guest suite they'd given me, I rummaged through the drawers looking for a pen and found something tucked behind a false panel. A bundle of letters, wrapped in a ribbon yellowed by time. My name, Elena, was scrawled on the top in handwriting that was both graceful and trembling. I opened one. The ink was faded, but the emotion in every line was raw and alive. My darling girl. If this finds you, it means I failed. But it also means you're alive. They told me to stop searching. They said it would break me. But I never stopped. I never stopped. Your mother, Julia. I sat on the edge of the bed, letter clutched in both hands, and cried for a woman I never got the chance to know. And for the little girl who never got to be loved by her real mother. The next morning, I woke to find the estate buzzing. A sleek black car pulled into the drive, tinted windows, government plates. Out stepped two men in tailored suits, and with them, a woman in dark sunglasses. Branson met them at the door, and whispers spread like wildfire. Daniel appeared beside me, already looking at his phone. She's here, he said. Who? He showed me an email. A new claimant had emerged. Another woman. Same supposed birth date. Same alleged mother. Her name? Elena Lennox. I blinked. She's claiming to be me? Daniel's jaw tightened. It's a game now. Someone's trying to muddy the waters. We watched from the second-floor landing as the woman entered the parlor. She looked like me, eerily so. Same hair color, same height. But there was something off. Too polished. Too manufactured. Margaret stood in shock, her cane shaking. What is this? She whispered. The woman smiled warmly. I've come home. Victor stood beside her, his hand on her back. That was all I needed to see. She's with him, I muttered. She's part of his plan. Daniel's voice dropped. We need a second DNA test. Deeper this time. Mitochondrial and nuclear. Court ordered. I nodded. Then let's do it. But even as we began the legal process, I knew something darker was at play. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about control. Power. And deception so deep it could rewrite my very existence. Late that night, as I walked past Victor's study, I heard them laughing. Her, the fake Elena, and him. Her voice shifted mid-sentence. Gone was the gentle tone. We're winning, darling. Darling. That word didn't belong to a sister. That was no innocent woman. I backed away into the shadows, my heart pounding. The truth wasn't just being hidden. It was being performed. And I was going to burn it all down before they got the chance. They called her Elena Lennox with such conviction that for a split second, I questioned my own skin. She walked into the estate like she belonged there, wrapped in a camel hair coat, lips painted blood red, heels tapping the marble floor with theatrical precision. But it wasn't her voice, her posture, or her surgically calm demeanor that bothered me the most. It was the way Margaret looked at her. The way hope flickered in her aging eyes, just like it had when she first saw me. Margaret didn't know who to trust. And honestly, how could she? This woman, this counterfeit version of me, had documentation, a hospital photo that looked doctored but clever, and a glossy backstory that placed her in foster homes across the Midwest. It was just enough tragedy to sound real. Just enough gaps to sound plausible. Victor stood by her side, arms folded like a king watching the board reset mid-game. He wasn't even trying to hide the smugness on his face. The message was clear, this wasn't about confusion. It was a coup. Branson Hale, ever the stone-faced lawyer, held both our files in his hands and sighed like this was beneath him. Given the emergence of this second claimant, the estate has no choice but to halt all financial redistribution until identity is conclusively confirmed. We'll pursue further DNA analysis. Possibly a full genomic scan. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something, cursed, cried. But all I did was smile, because that was what they didn't expect. They expected me to unravel. Instead, I folded my rage into ice. Daniel leaned in as we left the room and whispered, "She's lying." But someone powerful's backing her. This isn't her first con. That night, I watched her. She moved through the estate like she owned it, greeting the staff, asking about renovations, even admiring the oil paintings like she remembered them. She was rehearsing. Testing. Gauging what she could get away with. When she passed Julia's door, however, she didn't pause. Not even a glance. And that told me everything I needed to know. A real daughter would have looked. Would have felt something. Daniel began digging the moment we returned to the guest wing. His laptop glowed as he traced her social security records, state IDs, tax returns, but none of them went back further than 8 years. Before that, she simply didn't exist. No school records. No bank accounts. Just a black hole. She's a plant, he muttered. Someone made her real on paper. Victor? I asked. Daniel nodded. Likely. He's got offshore accounts. He could afford a full synthetic identity. And he'd do it, if it meant keeping you from taking the estate. Later that evening, we met with Judge Halstead via secure video conference. She was the one overseeing the estate review and inheritance claims. Her face was stern, but fair. I want full genomic testing from both parties, she ordered. Witness supervision. Chain of custody. I'm not ruling on anything until I know who's who. I am who I say I am, I told her, staring directly into the camera. She didn't smile. And she says the same. So let's settle it with science. As the call ended, I turned to Daniel. This isn't just about the estate. Victor's scared of something else. You think it's about the will? I think it's about whatever he's been hiding for 30 years. The next day, the fake Elena, her real name still unknown, tried to speak to me in the garden. She approached with a soft smile, her voice dipped in honey. I'm not here to hurt you, she said. I just want what's mine. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. It doesn't have to be a war. You're calling it peace after you broke into a life that was never yours? I replied, not bothering to hide the venom in my voice. Her smile faded, just slightly. You were gone. Someone had to fill the space. That's when I saw it, the slip. The crack in the mask. You talk like you were recruited, I said slowly. She blinked. Just once. But it was enough. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. We're not that different, you and I. We both learned how to survive. And she walked away. Later, I found a note slipped under my door. No name. No signature. Just 4 words written in careful cursive. Check the foundation logs. I showed it to Daniel, who immediately began digging into estate renovation records. Sure enough, 4 years ago, a section of the east wing was quietly demolished and rebuilt. No permits. No official documentation. But the contractors were paid handsomely. What was there before? I asked. According to this, he said, a vault. Sealed since 1994. That night, I crept through the east wing with a flashlight and Daniel by my side. We followed the blueprints he found until we came to a wall that had clearly been repainted. Behind it was the outline of a door. The hinges were gone, and the handle had been plastered over, but it had been there, once. We stood in silence. Whatever was in there, I whispered, they didn't want anyone to find. As we turned to leave, I heard voices down the hall. I ducked into the shadows, heart racing. Victor and the fake Elena. They didn't see us. I told you not to call me in public, he snapped. She folded her arms. She's not breaking. This might not work. It will, he hissed. Because if it doesn't, both of us go down. You promised I'd get a cut. And you will, he said. But only if she disappears. She hesitated. Disappear, how? Victor didn't answer. They walked away, and I stayed frozen in place, bile rising in my throat. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for my life. And I had no idea who else might be wearing my face next. The Lennox Estate Library was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that felt layered, as if every bookshelf, every painting, every crack in the oak panels had witnessed something it couldn't forget. Daniel and I stood in front of a built-in bookshelf that he insisted hid something important. I didn't question him anymore. Every time he followed a hunch, it led us deeper into the truth. He pulled a thin metal tool from his coat and pried gently at the edge of the molding. There was a soft click. The bookshelf shifted slightly, revealing a narrow hidden compartment behind it. Dust fell like ash. Inside was a long black case, locked, but old. The kind of lock that existed before biometrics and keypads. A single keyhole, brass, and worn. Is this legal? I whispered, even though we were alone. He didn't answer. Just picked the lock like he'd done it 100 times. With a soft pop, the lid opened. What we found inside changed everything. It was a will. Not the official, sanitized version Branson had read weeks ago, but an earlier draft. Older paper, more emotion in the language. Julia's signature was missing, but her initials were in the margins. And at the top, in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, to be signed upon Elena's return. The content wasn't just different, it was seismic. Every major asset, the estate, the company shares, even the offshore accounts, were allocated to me. Not Victor. Not divided. Not negotiated. Mine. Unconditional. Daniel scanned it quickly, then looked at me with a mix of awe and alarm. This changes everything. If this document is validated as real intent, it overrides Victor's claim completely. My mouth had gone dry. But it's unsigned. That doesn't matter, he said. Not in a family trust. If we can prove it was her intent, and if we tie it to her disappearance, it will stand up in probate court. The floor beneath me seemed to shift. I held the will in my hands and felt the weight of it. Not just the paper, but the belief. Someone had once believed I'd come home. Someone had made a plan for it. And that someone was gone. We took photos of every page and hid the original back in the compartment. We couldn't let anyone know what we'd found, not yet. Not until we were ready to use it. That night, I barely slept. My dreams were filled with images of locked doors, burning documents, voices calling my name in the dark. I woke up at 3:17 a.m., heart racing, drenched in sweat. Something felt wrong. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway, barefoot and cautious. The house creaked in its sleep. The chandeliers above were off, but moonlight glinted through the windows. As I neared my guest room again, I saw it. My door was open. I never left it open. I froze. Inside, a shadow moved, slow, deliberate. A figure stood near my dresser, rifling through my drawers. I stepped back into the hallway, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Daniel," I whispered as I reached for my phone, but I didn't make the call. The floor creaked under my foot. The figure turned. We locked eyes. He was wearing black. Masked. But his build was familiar. Too familiar. He bolted toward the window and disappeared through it with terrifying ease. I rushed into the room, heart hammering, and saw the dresser drawers torn open. My clothes thrown everywhere. But nothing was taken, not visibly. Then I checked my coat pocket. The USB drive with the Will photos was gone. I woke Daniel, breathless and furious. We searched the grounds. Security was non-existent. The cameras were conveniently turned off. "Victor," I spat. "It has to be him." Daniel nodded grimly. "He knows we found something. And now he's trying to erase it before it reaches court." We filed a police report, though we both knew it would be buried. The local sheriff was Victor's former golf partner. The real battle wouldn't happen in a jail cell. It would happen in the courtroom. The next morning, Margaret summoned us to her solarium. She looked pale, thinner somehow, her fingers trembling around her teacup. "There was someone in the house last night," she said. "I heard footsteps outside my door." I nodded. "Me too." She looked at me, and something in her eyes hardened. "This place is no longer safe for you. Nor is my protection enough." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a printed copy of the will draft we'd recovered. I laid it on the table before her. She stared at it for a long time, her eyes glossing with tears. "I wrote that," she whispered. "I remember every line." "Did Julia see it?" I asked. She nodded. "She helped me write it. She said if anything happened to her, Elena must be protected." I placed my hand over hers. "Then help me. Help me make it count." Margaret turned her gaze to the frosted garden window. "You will need to fight like your mother did. And be twice as ruthless." Daniel's phone buzzed just then. A message from one of his contacts. He read it and turned to me. "They filed a motion to block your claim. Victor's lawyer says your identity is still under dispute due to the second Elena. He's calling you an imposter." I laughed, bitterly. "He's trying to erase me again. Just like he did when I was 3. Daniel's eyes darkened. "Then it's time to stop playing defense." I nodded slowly. "It's time to go to war." As I turned to leave, I glanced over my shoulder and saw Margaret standing alone, holding the draft will like it was a piece of her daughter. And I knew, if I didn't destroy Victor first, he'd bury every trace of me again. Next time, maybe forever. I should have known better than to step foot into Victor's territory. When his lawyer, Harlan Elmsworth, a man with a voice like gravel and a handshake like a death grip, reached out to clear the air, I knew it was bait. But part of me wanted to look the enemy in the eye. I wanted to see how much fear I could pull from the people who had buried my name for 32 years. So I agreed to meet at his downtown law office, a high-rise fortress of glass and granite with a reputation for burying things deeper than graves. Daniel didn't like it. He argued the whole drive-in. "This isn't neutral ground, Elena. It's a setup. They're not afraid of paperwork, they're afraid of what we know. His eyes were darting from the road to the rearview mirror as if he expected someone to follow us. Let me go in first. Alone. No, I said. If they're going to lie to my face, I want them to see mine while they do it. The elevator ride to the 34th floor felt endless. The receptionist offered us water with a too-sweet smile, and the glass-walled conference room smelled like cold leather and expensive fear. Harlan greeted us with the kind of grin that made your stomach knot. Victor was already seated, legs crossed, fingertips pressed together like he was auditioning for a villain monologue. We're here to propose a resolution, Harlan began smoothly. A private settlement. No court. No press. That was all I needed to hear to know they were scared. They wouldn't offer a settlement unless they knew the documents, the DNA, and the truth were stacked in my favor. Still, I let them talk. Victor said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Just watched. When I refused the offer, his voice finally cut through. You think this will end with you on a throne, he said. But you have no idea what this family is built on. I stared him down. Maybe not. But I'm learning fast. Harlan handed over a folder and motioned for us to review it privately. Daniel and I took it to the side room, small, windowless, and supposedly secure. As Daniel flipped through the pages, I noticed something strange. The timestamps. The signatures. They were digitally layered. Nothing was wet-signed. And then the screen on the conference room monitor blinked, for a fraction of a second. Daniel froze. They're stalling. What? They're deleting records. He yanked open his laptop and hacked into the building's public Wi-Fi. His fingers flew across the keys. He cracked into the law firm's internal file log, and that's when we saw it, a live deletion queue. Estate files. Julia's records. DNA reports. Correspondence between Victor and offshore firms. All being purged in real time. They're scrubbing the truth, Daniel muttered. This was never about negotiation. It's a digital hit job. I lunged for the door. It didn't open. Locked. Daniel tried his phone. No service. They're jamming signals in here. My heart pounded in my throat. We were trapped in a soundproof room while they erased every legal footprint of my existence. Window? No windows. I looked around and saw an air vent, just wide enough. Daniel kicked over a chair and hoisted himself up. I followed, crawling through a steel tunnel of dust and metal until we reached the maintenance corridor. The drop was rough. I scraped my elbow on the edge, but adrenaline overruled pain. We found a stairwell and bolted. On the 27th floor, Daniel kicked open the IT room. A single technician stood frozen, eyes wide, hands still on his keyboard. Off the system, Daniel barked. Now. The kid hesitated, until I showed him the photo of Julia's unsigned will. You destroy that, you destroy evidence of a federal crime, I said. Your choice. The kid paled and stepped away. Daniel plugged into the mainframe. Within minutes, he recovered fragments of what had been deleted. Most were corrupted. But one document, oddly, was intact. It was a project folder titled Operation Elena Swap, 1993. I held my breath as he opened it. Inside were scans of letters, surveillance notes, and photos. One photo made my knees go weak. It was me. A toddler. In the hospital nursery. Next to me was another girl. The caption read, Asset A, Elena Lennox. Asset B, unknown. Potential match. Operation swap initiated. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. They didn't just steal you. They tried to replace you. The files referenced bribes to hospital staff, falsified death reports, and most chilling, a psychiatric evaluation of Julia Lennox 6 weeks before her reported death. It claimed she was paranoid, emotionally unstable, and obsessed with conspiracies regarding her daughter's disappearance. They discredited her, I whispered. They made her look crazy so no one would believe her. Daniel nodded grimly. Classic setup. They made sure no one would listen even if she screamed. We downloaded everything and disappeared down the fire escape. As we burst out into the alley, breathless and covered in soot and fear, I realized something vital. This wasn't just about money. It never had been. This was about erasure. They didn't just want my inheritance. They wanted the entire story rewritten. And they were willing to lock doors, burn files, and bury bodies to make it happen. But I was done being buried. I held the printed file in my lap, reading each word again and again until the letters blurred into smoke. Julia Lennox, emotionally unstable, delusional episodes, refused medication. Each line read like a verdict. Each sentence felt like a betrayal. I had imagined my mother as a victim, but what I found was worse. They'd turned her into a ghost while she was still alive. They didn't kill her outright. They erased her sanity, her credibility, and eventually her existence. Daniel paced the motel room, his phone glued to his ear. He was speaking in clipped tones to a contact in Boston's public records office, trying to validate Julia's death certificate. The details never quite added up. The date of death was listed as June 2, 1994, 1 year and 7 months after I was taken. The cause? Sudden cardiac event. No autopsy. No witness signature. Just a name typed onto a piece of paper and stamped with finality. She didn't die that day, I whispered. Daniel turned. No, she didn't. Because someone renewed her passport 6 months later. He held out his phone. On the screen was a scanned passport renewal dated December 1994, under the name Julia Evelyn Lennox. The photo was blurry, but the eyes, those eyes, I had seen them in the mirror my entire life. I need to find her, I said, heart pounding. If there's even a chance she was alive longer than they said, I need to know what happened to her. Daniel didn't argue. He never did when my voice sounded like that, desperate, raw, shaken but focused. We began digging through hospital records, cross-referencing psychiatric facilities that had been operating in Massachusetts during the mid-90s. Most led nowhere. Until one search result blinked onto the screen. A private clinic in rural Connecticut, long defunct, called Brindlewood Restorative Center. No public documents. No active licenses. But an anonymous patient listed only by initials, JL. We drove 4 hours through rain and fog, winding up a cracked asphalt road that led to a property hidden behind rusted iron gates and an overgrown wall of trees. The building was a mausoleum, ivy-strangled windows, rotting shutters, the words Brindlewood Restorative barely visible above the entrance. It had been closed for over a decade, abandoned after a string of lawsuits involving unethical patient treatment and secretive family arrangements. Inside, the smell of mold and damp history clung to everything. We moved through corridors with flashlights, illuminating patient rooms stripped bare. But in the back, through a locked door Daniel picked open, we found it, the archive room. Filing cabinets sagged with moisture, manila folders warped and yellowed. Daniel opened drawers while I scanned labels, my hands trembling. Then I found it. Room 216. Patient JL. I opened the folder and felt my knees weaken. Her intake photo was clipped to the first page, Julia Lennox, hair tangled, eyes hollow but unmistakably mine. She looked exhausted, defeated, but alive. The file revealed everything. She had been admitted in early 1994 under pressure from the Lennox legal team. The notes referred to emotional instability following child loss, and her guardianship had been quietly transferred to Margaret Lennox. My stomach turned. Margaret committed her own daughter, I breathed. She didn't just fail to protect her. She locked her away. Daniel's face was pale. And no one stopped it. I turned the page and found notes from weekly evaluations, most of them clinical nonsense, but in the margins were scribbles. Julia's handwriting. Barely visible in faded pencil. Sentences half erased, fragmented, but urgent. She's alive. I know it. They lied about the fire. Victor forged the report. Elena, please remember me. The tears came fast and hard. I sat on the floor and wept until my body shook. I had spent so long imagining my mother's face, her voice, the way she would have held me. And now I knew, she had never stopped searching. She hadn't abandoned me. She had been trapped. Daniel knelt beside me, gently handing me a sealed envelope tucked into the back of the file. It was addressed, "To Elena, if you ever find this." I opened it slowly, my breath catching. My darling girl. If these words ever reach you, then I hope you have found your way home. I hope you are safe, and I hope the truth did not destroy you. They told me you were gone. But I knew. I felt it in my bones. I fought them. I fought until they locked me away. You were stolen. I tried to take you the night before the fire. I knew Victor had done something. I just couldn't prove it. Elena, you are more than their money, more than their schemes. You are mine. You are light. Fight them. Finish what I started. I love you always. Mom. I clutched the letter to my chest and screamed. The building echoed the sound back like a choir of grief. Later, we stood at the back of the property, where a rusted gate led to an unmarked graveyard. There was no headstone, but a weathered cross bore the initials JL and the date July 7, 2017. She died here, I whispered. She died alone. Daniel placed a hand on my shoulder. But now she's not forgotten. We buried the letter there. It felt right, a daughter returning her mother's voice to the soil that tried to silence it. As we left Brindlewood, I turned for one last look at the place that had swallowed Julia whole. But I wasn't broken. I was sharpened. And the storm inside me had found its name. Revenge. I had never stepped foot inside a courtroom until the day I walked into one to reclaim the life that was stolen from me. Everything about the place felt surreal, the marble floors, the polished oak panels, the elevated bench where the judge would sit and decide who I was allowed to be. There was a weight in that room, a solemnity that seemed to choke the breath from my lungs. But I didn't let it show. I wore my mother's necklace, a slim silver chain with a locket I found in the Brindlewood file. It was the only armor I had left from her, and I needed her with me today. Margaret was already seated on the plaintiff's side, pale and still, her cane resting against the table. Daniel stood beside me, organizing exhibits and motion filings with surgical focus. Across the aisle sat Victor, smug and poised in his bespoke suit, his fake sister, the imposter, seated beside him, her posture perfect, her smile condescending. Their legal team was a small army. Suits, binders, and whispered strategy. All of them hired to silence me. To rewrite the truth. The judge entered, and everyone rose. She was sharp-eyed and unapologetically direct, the kind of woman who had no patience for theatrics. I respected her immediately. She reviewed the case summary aloud, her voice echoing through the chamber like the ticking of a clock counting down to something irreversible. Then it was time. Opening statements, she said, motioning to my side. Daniel stepped forward and began. He spoke with calm conviction, laying out the timeline, my confirmed identity, the forged documents, the will we uncovered, the DNA test results. He painted a picture not just of inheritance stolen, but of a child erased and a mother silenced. Every word chipped away at the illusion Victor had built around his version of the Lennox legacy. When Victor's lead attorney stood, he adjusted his cufflinks before speaking. His opening was polished and venomous, delivered with a kind of syrupy sympathy that made my skin crawl. He framed me as confused, as desperate for belonging, as someone who was emotionally vulnerable and likely manipulated into believing a fabricated origin story. And then, as if choreographed, he introduced the final blow. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a flash drive, "we have a recording. In it, the claimant appears to admit she falsified her identity in order to gain access to the Lennox estate. We will play this in full." The judge nodded, curious but cautious. The lights dimmed. The speakers clicked. And then I heard my own voice. Or I thought it was mine. The recording was fuzzy, distorted slightly, but undeniably me. A version of me saying the words, "They'll believe anything." All I had to do was pretend to be her. Easy money. I went cold. My stomach turned inside out as I turned to Daniel, eyes wide. He was already typing, fingers flying over his laptop. "That's fake," I whispered. "I never said that." The courtroom shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Even Margaret looked shaken, her hand trembling over her chest. The judge paused the recording midway and turned to us. "Counselor?" Daniel stood immediately. "We object, Your Honor. This audio is heavily edited. We'll present forensic analysis proving it's manipulated and not admissible as is." Victor leaned back, smirking. I wanted to claw that expression off his face. The judge nodded. "I'll allow playback to cease for now. Submit your expert review by tomorrow morning. But if it's real, Ms. Lennox, it does damage your claim." Her tone was impartial, but it struck like a gavel to the chest. The hearing adjourned for the day. I barely made it to the hallway before I broke. The moment the courtroom doors closed behind us, I collapsed against the marble wall, gasping for breath. "That recording," I whispered, they can't do that, right?" Daniel knelt beside me, his voice calm but deadly serious. "They already did. But we can prove it's a fake. I know someone, a forensic audio expert. I've worked with him before. He can have a full analysis done within 12 hours. I nodded, gripping the locket at my throat like a lifeline. "I can't lose this, Daniel. I can't let them win." "You won't," he said, his eyes burning. "But we're not just playing defense anymore. It's time we hit them where it hurts." That night, I sat in Margaret's drawing room, watching the fire crackle in the hearth while she read through a legal brief. Her face was tired, older than I remembered. She looked at me suddenly, with tears swimming behind her glassy eyes. "I never knew what Victor had become," she said softly. "I thought I was protecting him, and by doing that, I failed to protect you. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to forgive someone who let my mother be locked away and let me disappear into someone else's life. But I understood now. Love doesn't always look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like blindness." "I'm not asking you to fix the past," I said. "But I need you to stand beside me when we reveal the truth. All of it." "I will," she said. "Whatever it takes." Hours later, Daniel called. "The audio's doctored," he said. "Blended from different phone calls. Voice synthesis overlay. We have the proof. It's a fake." I closed my eyes and exhaled. The next court session couldn't come soon enough. But I didn't know that by the time I walked back into that courtroom, another trap would already be waiting. Victor hadn't played his final card. Not yet. The next morning, the courtroom felt different, colder somehow, as if the building itself had begun to understand the darkness unfolding inside its walls. I wore black. Not for mourning, but for focus. For war. Daniel walked beside me in silence, carrying the hard drive that contained our rebuttal, the forensic proof that the damning tape was nothing more than a manufactured lie. The judge sat taller today, more alert, her eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned the room. Victor and his legal team were already seated, all stiff shoulders and silent glares. The fake Elena wore a tailored navy suit with pearls at her throat, trying so hard to radiate composure, but I could see it now, the small flinches, the darting gaze. She was cracking. Daniel stood first. His voice was steady, crisp, and full of the kind of restrained fury that always lands harder than rage. He introduced our forensic analyst, a bespectacled man named Reeve Langley, who walked the court through a detailed breakdown of the audio's creation. Word by word, he tore apart the illusion. "The recording played yesterday was digitally manipulated," Reeve explained. "The voice you hear was stitched together from multiple recordings using deep fake synthesis and layering software. Spectral inconsistencies and unnatural inflections are evident in this waveform. He displayed the visual breakdown of the audio across the courtroom screens, color-coded spikes and overlays that exposed every lie. The judge leaned forward, focused. "And in your professional opinion, Mr. Langley, is there any chance the recording could be real?" "None," he said flatly. "It was fabricated." There was a heavy silence. One that even Victor couldn't squirm his way out of. The judge turned toward his side of the room. "Counselor, would you like to respond?" Harlan Elmsworth, Victor's loyal dog in a suit, stood slowly, looking as though he'd swallowed a rusty nail. "Your Honor, we were presented the tape by an external witness. We had no reason to doubt its authenticity." "You presented it without vetting it," the judge snapped. "And nearly defamed a verified legal claimant. This court doesn't deal in fiction." Victor didn't blink. But the fingers on his right hand tapped against the table. A soft, repetitive rhythm, one I'd come to associate with his frustration. I stood. "Your Honor, they tried to destroy my identity with a forged confession. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an attack." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to address the court. "Pending further investigation, this court rejects the audio recording as inadmissible and prejudicial. Any further fabricated evidence will result in sanctions. This is your only warning." It felt like a win. But only just. Outside, cameras waited. Journalists circled like hawks, shouting my name, Victor's, demanding statements. Daniel pulled me through the crowd and into the back of a waiting car. Once the door slammed shut, we both exhaled. "I thought she was going to throw the whole case," I said. "She almost did," Daniel replied. "But you held the line. You didn't flinch. That's what won today." We drove in silence until his phone buzzed with a message. He read it once and cursed under his breath. "What is it?" "My contact at the estate just flipped," he said. "Victor's assistant, Marla, she's ready to talk." I froze. "The one who's always trailing behind him? Silent? Blonde hair?" "That's her. She reached out anonymously. Said she's tired of being part of this. She wants immunity in exchange for what she knows." We rerouted to a private location, a safe house Daniel had used for other clients, and waited. When Marla arrived, she was shaking. She wore oversized sunglasses, and her voice cracked even before she sat down. "I can't do it anymore," she said. "He's going too far. You weren't supposed to get this close." "Start from the beginning," Daniel said gently. "Tell us everything." Marla exhaled shakily. "Victor planned it all. Years ago. He knew the estate clause would ruin him if you ever came back. So he made sure you'd never be found. And when that failed, he created a backup." "The fake Elena," I said. "Yes. Her name's not Elena. It's Mira Jennings. She was paid to pose as you. Given documents. A full identity. They practiced everything, mannerisms, backstory, medical files. I watched her study your baby photos like flashcards. It felt like acid pouring through my chest." "And the tape?" "He paid a tech firm in Berlin to create it. Discreetly. Offshore accounts. He planned to discredit you, confuse the court, and exhaust you into quitting. He forged my mother's death," I whispered. Marla nodded. "He did worse. He knew she was alive. He knew she was in Brindlewood." I blinked. "How?" "Because he's the one who had her committed." The room spun. A buzzing filled my ears. "I found the authorization papers," she said, pulling a folder from her bag. "He signed them. Claimed she was a danger to herself and to the family's reputation. She begged to see you. Begged to leave. They drugged her until she couldn't speak." Daniel reached across the table. "Would you testify to this?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If I get protection." "You'll have it," I said. Marla stood, trembling, and before she left, she said one last thing. He said if you ever came back, he'd finish what he started in 1993. The door closed behind her, and I sat there, shaking, my mother's necklace burning against my skin like a brand. They didn't just want my name. They wanted to silence anyone who remembered it. And now, Victor knew his lies were unraveling. Which meant his next move would be desperate. And deadly. When Daniel and I returned to the estate that night, the air felt electric, like a storm had passed but left its threat behind. The truth was surfacing, and the weight of it hung in the halls like fog. Victor hadn't spoken publicly since the court had dismissed the tape, but I knew silence didn't mean surrender. It meant strategy. He was watching us, preparing, hunting for the next weakness to strike. But he didn't know we had found his. The next morning, we met with Margaret in her private study, a smaller, more personal space tucked behind the west wing. It was filled with photos of Julia, newspaper clippings from her days at Harvard, awards she'd received in biotech innovation before her life was ripped apart. As I ran my fingers along the frames, I felt her absence like a scream. I want to see the books, I said. Margaret turned from the window. The estate ledgers? No. The companies. The Lennox Pharma accounts. I want to see where the money went after I disappeared. There was a long pause. Then, slowly, she walked to a locked drawer and pulled out a thin, black binder. These are partial records. The full ledgers are with the board, but this will show you enough. I opened the binder and immediately saw it. A pattern. Transfers that started 6 weeks after my disappearance, massive withdrawals from the family trust, redirected into shell companies, foreign accounts, consulting firms with no staff and no deliverables. I turned to Daniel. What's Jasmine Holdings? Fake, he said instantly. It's not even registered in the US. That's a laundering shell. And there were others, all tied to Victor. Over $10 million disappeared in the year after I was kidnapped. Money listed under search and recovery expenses, but never used for search teams, private investigators, or police liaison fees. They never looked for me, I whispered. They made it look like they did, but they never intended to find me. Daniel leaned over the table, flipping to the next section. This is more than embezzlement. This is fraud at a corporate level. He used your disappearance to fund his takeover. That's racketeering. We documented every line. By noon, we had a full report prepped for court. But the real blow wouldn't come from paper, it would come from the final witness we hadn't called yet. A retired nanny named Beatrice Howell. She had worked for the family for 10 years and vanished from payroll exactly 1 month after I disappeared. Daniel tracked her down in a small town in upstate New York. It took 2 days of negotiation, but she agreed to testify, not for money, not for immunity. For guilt. The courtroom was full when we returned for the next hearing. This time, the press wasn't whispering. They were salivating. Headlines about the fake audio had hit the tabloids. Heiress framed in billion-dollar fraud. The public wasn't just watching. They were invested. Beatrice took the stand, her white hair neatly pinned, her voice trembling but clear. I was there the night Julia tried to leave, she said. She had Elena in her arms. Suitcase packed. She was crying, shaking. She said Victor had threatened her. Said he'd take the baby if she didn't give up custody. The room stilled. She tried to run, Beatrice continued, tears welling in her eyes. But she never got the chance. Julia was drugged the next day. Committed the week after. I was paid to say I saw nothing. I've lived with that shame ever since. Victor's attorney objected. Your Honor, this is hearsay from decades ago. Sustained, the judge said, but noted. Beatrice reached into her bag and pulled out a bundle of old letters. These were written by Julia. To her mother. To the board. They were never mailed. I found them hidden under a drawer. She begged for help. Begged for someone to find Elena. She knew what they were doing. I felt the ground beneath me shift again. The judge asked for the letters to be submitted into evidence. The moment sealed with a sharp bang of the gavel. But it wasn't over. Daniel handed in the forensic ledger analysis, and the court clerk distributed copies. As the judge read through the numbers, her expression changed from curiosity to rage. "You're alleging the defendant embezzled nearly $20 million from his own family's trust over a 10-year period," she asked sharply. Daniel stood. "We're not alleging, Your Honor. We're proving." The judge turned to Victor. "Do you have a response?" Victor stood slowly, his hands clasped behind his back like a smug schoolboy pretending to behave. "The family gave me control of the estate in a time of crisis. I made decisions to protect our future. My sister's death devastated us all. If mistakes were made, they were made in grief." He was lying. And everyone in the room could feel it. Margaret stood suddenly. The courtroom gasped. "I did not give you control," she said, voice shaking with anger. "You took it. You manipulated me. You poisoned me with pills prescribed by your own doctor until I didn't know which way was up. And you lied. About Julia. About Elena. About everything." The judge held up a hand. "We will resume after a recess." Court adjourned. But as the gavel struck, I turned and caught Victor's eye. He was no longer smirking. He was afraid. That night, as we prepared for the final day of testimony, Daniel found something else in the audio files, a whisper at the end of a previously overlooked recording. A single line, hidden beneath static. "Julia never died. She was locked away." I stared at the screen, heart racing. There was still more. A final thread. And I was going to follow it. No matter where it led. It was just after sunrise when Daniel and I returned to Brindlewood, the decaying asylum where my mother had spent the last years of her life locked away like a secret. The frost clung to the brittle grass, and the clouds hung low in the sky, as if the earth itself wanted to keep its silence. But I wasn't here for silence. I was here for truth. The kind that stained. The kind that hurt. Daniel had received a call late the night before from a records clerk at the state archive who owed him a favor. The man found something we'd missed, a financial ledger connected to Brindlewood, sealed under the guise of medical confidentiality. It wasn't in Julia's name. It was in Victor's. We walked through the rusted gates with flashlights in hand, past the grave where I had left Julia's letter, past the hallways still thick with the weight of forgotten screams. The file cabinet we'd seen on our last visit had been rifled through. Someone else had been here since. But they hadn't looked closely enough. Behind a panel near the old administrator's office, Daniel pried open a section of wall and pulled out a metal case. Inside were payment ledgers, each one handwritten, bound in string. Page after page of names, dates, initials, and dollar amounts, all carefully noted. Julia's patient ID was there. But beside it, under monthly benefactor, was Victor's name. "He paid for her to be held," I said, my voice hoarse. "Every month. For over 10 years, Daniel confirmed. He funded her imprisonment under the radar. And then, in 2007, payments stopped." I flipped to the next page. The note was short and brutal: "Patient JL transferred to isolation ward. Final evaluation pending." I clenched my jaw, fingers digging into the paper. He didn't just lock her away. He killed her slowly. We continued through the facility until we found the isolation wing. The air was different here, colder, stiller. The walls were padded in peeling white, and the windows were bolted shut. In the last room at the end of the hall, the door was still intact. On the wall, someone had scrawled letters into the paint with their fingernails. "Elena." My knees gave out. I pressed my hand against the wall, imagining her there. Alone. Afraid. Writing my name so she wouldn't forget who she was fighting for. On the floor, beneath rotted tiles, Daniel uncovered a cracked metal box. Inside it, wrapped in a blood-stained hospital sheet, was a leather-bound journal. Julia's. I opened it with trembling fingers. Her handwriting was shaky, looping, barely legible in places, but the emotion bled through every line. They told me you were dead. But I feel you. Every time I close my eyes. I see you on the porch, your hands full of flowers. You are alive. You are waiting. And I must endure until you come. Each page broke me open a little more. She documented the first year, then the fifth, and then nothing for a long time. Until one final entry, dated shortly before her death. If Elena finds this, make them pay. Everything they took. Everything they twisted. Tear it from their hands. Make them remember who you are. I closed the journal, tears falling freely. She waited for me, I whispered. Daniel nodded. She never stopped believing. We returned to the car in silence, the journal clutched in my hands like scripture. Back at the estate, Margaret was waiting. I placed the ledger, the payment records, and Julia's final journal on the table before her. She read through them in a slow, devastated silence. I always suspected, she said finally. But I never had the strength to face it. You have it now, I told her. We go to court with this. We end him. That night, Victor showed up at the estate unannounced. He stood in the foyer like he still owned it, like his name alone gave him the right to exist within these walls. His suit was immaculate. His expression unreadable. But I saw it, the tremor in his hand, the sheen of sweat at his hairline. You should have walked away when you had the chance, he said. You should have never taken what wasn't yours, I replied. His gaze flicked to Margaret. You're letting her destroy everything. No, Margaret said coldly. You did that all on your own. Victor turned to leave, but paused at the door. You think this ends in court? He asked. You have no idea what this family has buried. What it's protected. I know exactly what it's buried, I said, holding up Julia's journal. And I'm done letting it rot. He left without another word. That night, I sat in Julia's room for the first time. Margaret had kept it untouched, the books on the shelf, the hairbrush on the dresser, the blanket folded neatly at the end of the bed. I lit a candle and placed her journal beside it. I wanted her to know I had it. That I'd read every word. I'm here, Mom, I whispered into the silence. And I'm not leaving. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. But inside me, there was stillness. Purpose. Clarity. They tried to erase my name, my blood, my mother's love. But the ledger doesn't lie. And neither do ghosts. The courtroom wouldn't just see a battle over money anymore. They would witness a reckoning. The courthouse was packed by the time we arrived, the media having caught wind of the storm we were about to unleash. Reporters shouted questions that blurred together. What's in the ledger? Is Victor Lennox being charged? Is it true Julia Lennox was alive all these years? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was its own kind of statement now, the calm before the drop. And what we had was not just a drop. It was a plunge straight into hell, for Victor. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with the electricity of expectation. This wasn't just a legal matter anymore. This had become a national obsession. A wealthy heiress, stolen, hidden, forged identities, secret journals, and now, financial crimes woven through the walls of a pharmaceutical empire. The judge entered and called the court to order. Her eyes fell on Victor with the kind of glare that could gut a man without a word. Daniel stood first. He presented the asylum ledger, the monthly payments signed in Victor's own hand, and the forensic timeline showing how those payments coincided perfectly with Julia's long disappearance from public records. The judge leaned in, clearly absorbing every detail. But it wasn't until Daniel handed her the copy of Julia's journal, the original sealed in evidence, that the tone of the room shifted. She read the final entry aloud. If Elena finds this, make them pay. The words hung in the air like a curse, and for a moment, even Victor's attorneys said nothing. The truth wasn't just on paper now. It had voice, emotion, blood. Victor tried to object. He rose from his seat, desperate to reclaim control, but the judge silenced him with one raised hand. "You will speak when I address you, Mr. Lennox." Not a moment before. Then came the forensic accountant, who detailed the financial transfers, not just to Brindlewood but to offshore firms that funneled Lennox trust funds into hidden projects and falsified contracts. $27 million gone. Misappropriated. Laundered. Embezzled. Victor sat there as if made of stone, but I saw it, the slight tremble in his fingers as he straightened his tie. His empire was unraveling. Margaret stood next. Slowly, but with steel in her spine, she walked to the front of the courtroom. "My grandson," she said bitterly, "used our family name to commit unspeakable crimes. He locked away his own mother. He orchestrated the theft of his sister. He forged, lied, stole. And I allowed it. Out of love. But love cannot be blind anymore." Her voice cracked on that last word, and for the first time, Victor turned away from her. He couldn't face what he'd destroyed. Then I stood. And the room fell into silence. "I was 3 years old when I vanished," I began. "I don't remember the kidnapping. But I remember growing up in a home that never felt like one. I remember being screamed at for asking questions. I remember wondering why my mother never came. And now I know, she never stopped trying." I pulled out the last item we had brought. Julia's locket. "She left this behind. Not because she forgot me, but because she was taken from me. Victor didn't just steal my inheritance. He stole my mother's voice. Her life. And her dignity. I came here for justice. But now, I'm here for vengeance." There were gasps in the courtroom. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge remained unmoved, or rather, unmoving, like a statue absorbing centuries of rage. "This court finds substantial evidence of fraud, embezzlement, willful manipulation of legal identity, and obstruction of justice. The court will be petitioning for a full criminal investigation. Effective immediately, Victor Lennox is to be removed from all positions of control within the Lennox estate and company. All assets are frozen pending further proceedings." Victor surged to his feet. "You can't do this. I built this empire. I kept it alive when everyone else gave up." "No," I said, cutting through the chaos. "You built a throne from bones. And now it's crumbling." Security approached. Victor tried to resist, but it was futile. He shouted something, unintelligible, guttural, more animal than man, as they escorted him out. The doors slammed shut behind him, and with them, decades of control and cruelty. Outside, the press erupted. Flashes, shouts, microphones shoved in our faces. But I didn't answer them. I walked straight into the arms of the life I was reclaiming. That night, I stood in the old estate library alone. Margaret had gone to her room in silence. Daniel was on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's office, arranging a full transfer of evidence to federal investigators. I stared at the fireplace and thought of Julia. Of what she might say now, if she could see me. I whispered into the quiet, "I did it, Mom." And for a second, just a second, I thought I heard her voice in the room. A soft laugh. A brush of air against my shoulder. But there was no rest yet. Because before the trial ended, the fake Elena, Mira, vanished. Disappeared overnight from her hotel, leaving behind her suitcase, her fake ID, and one single note tucked into her pillow. He lied to me, too. She was gone. And Victor? He wasn't finished. From his holding cell, he made one last move. A letter. Delivered to my door. Sealed in wax. My hands trembled as I broke it open. Inside was a single line. "You still don't know the real plan." The letter felt colder than paper had any right to be. I stared at it for hours, my fingers tracing over those 7 taunting words again and again. "You still don't know the real plan. There was no signature, no date, no threat, just a whisper from behind prison bars, designed to crawl beneath my skin and nest in my thoughts. It worked. I barely slept that night. My mind raced through every possibility. What hadn't I uncovered? What piece had Victor managed to keep hidden even after everything? Daniel was more cautious than usual the next morning. He doubled our security detail, rerouted our scheduled meetings, and made discreet calls to 2 federal contacts. If Victor's still playing games from jail, he's using someone on the outside, he said. We need to flush them out before they do more damage. The fake Elena, Mira, was still missing. Her disappearance was too clean, too efficient. No witness saw her leave. No credit card activity. Her last known communication had been a single text to an unknown number, "I'm done. You promised safety." After that, she vanished like smoke. I wasn't sure whether to hate her or pity her. She was a liar, yes. But she had been used, same as I had. Then came the bank alert. An international transfer attempt had triggered a fraud hold on one of the legacy Lennox accounts. The amount? $8 million. The recipient? A proxy shell company tied to Myra's real name, not Elena Lennox, but Miranda Jennings. She was trying to take what she could and disappear forever. But the alert saved us. It left a digital fingerprint, a clue, and more importantly, it gave us leverage. Daniel made the call. "Miranda," he said when she finally picked up, her voice shaky and cautious. "You're out of time." There was a long silence on the line. Then a breath. "I didn't know everything," she whispered. "I didn't know what he did to Julia. I thought I was playing a part. A game. You forged medical records. You almost got an innocent woman erased." "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "And I'll testify. I'll give you everything. Just promise me protection." "We'll make it happen," Daniel said. "But you're turning over the entire plan. Every document. Every message." That evening, she met us at a secure federal office in Hartford. Pale, thin, and stripped of the false confidence she'd worn in court, she looked like a shadow of the woman Victor had dressed up to be me. She handed over a laptop and a flash drive. "I wasn't the first," she said softly. "He tried others. Girls with similar features, similar ages. They failed the DNA matches. But I was the closest. He had me trained, tutored, even coached by someone who once worked for Julia. He wanted someone who could replace a ghost." I sat in the chair across from her and looked her in the eyes. "Why did you do it?" I asked. She blinked, and her eyes filled with tears. "I was nobody. He promised I could become someone." We submitted her full confession to the court and handed over the evidence to federal prosecutors. Victor's charges tripled overnight: identity fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, medical coercion, witness tampering. The media called it the most complex inheritance fraud case in American legal history. But that didn't mean it was over. 2 days later, a black car idled outside the estate. A man stepped out with a badge. "Abigail Monroe?" he asked. "That's not my name," I corrected. "It never was." "Apologies, Miss Lennox. We have one final file you need to see." It was uncovered during the federal asset investigation. He handed me a folder stamped "Confidential, Family Vault." Inside was a photocopy of a birth record. Not mine. But someone else's. Another Lennox child. Female. Born 2 years after me. Julia had another daughter? I whispered. Daniel read over my shoulder, his voice low. Hidden. Off the books. Not in any public record. Born during Julia's time at Brindlewood. But she was committed before I stopped. She must have given birth while inside. I turned the page and found a name written in faded ink. Not a full name. Just a first. Celeste. That was Victor's real plan. It wasn't about Mira. It wasn't about me. It was about the sister I never knew existed. Somewhere out there, another girl, a woman now, bore Julia's blood and Margaret's legacy. Another rightful heir. Another person who could threaten Victor's grip on power. Daniel's phone buzzed again. A private number. He answered, listened, then slowly turned to me. We just intercepted a message from Victor's attorney. He was trying to reach someone named Celeste through a proxy channel. I felt the world tilt beneath me. He knew where she was, I whispered. All this time. He didn't just erase Julia's past. He erased an entire child. That night, I walked the halls of the estate and looked at every portrait on the wall. The eyes of generations stared back at me, as if waiting for a reckoning. And now it was here. Victor was going to prison. Mira was testifying. The court would hand me control of the Lennox legacy. But there was still one ghost out there. And she had my mother's name in her blood. I didn't know who Celeste Lennox had become. I didn't know if she even knew who she was. But if she had any part of Julia's fire in her, she'd come looking. And when she did, I would be ready. Because if this was a war for a crown, then the final battle was just beginning. Even after everything, the courtroom battles, the forged identities, the confessions, I still wasn't ready for what Julia had left behind. I thought the last chapter of her story had been written at Brindlewood, sealed in the walls of a forgotten asylum and buried beneath Victor's greed. But then came the call from a Swiss banking authority, and the final thread unraveled in my hands. The voice on the phone was formal, laced with a faint accent, and cautious. We have an account under the name Julia Evelyn Lennox, the man said. It was flagged during a routine audit of inactive high-value accounts connected to the Lennox Foundation Trust. The beneficiary listed is Elena Lennox. My breath caught. What's in the account? I can't disclose specifics over the phone, but I suggest you come in person. There is also a vault. A physical one. 3 days later, Danielle and I flew to Geneva. The city was all clean streets, quiet wealth, and the scent of cold stone and fresh paper. Inside the bank's marble halls, I was led to a private room, sterile and guarded by 2 armed security personnel. My identification was verified, my fingerprints scanned, and then, with the soft click of ancient tumblers, the vault opened. It wasn't what I expected. No cash. No piles of gold or bearer bonds. Instead, inside a velvet-lined case, there was a ring, delicate, silver, with a sapphire so dark it looked black under the light. Beside it lay a bundle of letters wrapped in ribbon and a series of documents encased in plastic sleeves. Daniel took a slow breath as he skimmed the first few pages. She left you a company, he whispered. My hand shook as I pulled out the deed. Julia had acquired partial ownership of a biotech firm in Berlin, a quiet, cutting-edge company focusing on rare disease treatment. It wasn't part of the main Lennox pharma empire. This was separate. Hidden. Independent. A legacy untouched by Victor's corruption. Attached to it was a note, handwritten, folded neatly between 2 patent registration forms. If you ever find this, it means you've survived. This is yours now. Not a gift, but a weapon. They took everything from me. So I built something that can never be taken. Use it wisely. And protect what's left of us. I sank into the leather chair, the ring clutched in my palm, the note burning into my skin. All this time, while Victor was stealing power and Margaret was blindly enabling it, Julia had been building something real. Quietly. Secretly. Strategically. She had known that her voice would be erased, so she gave me a way to shout through time. Danielle studied the business structure and found something even more stunning. She named a second beneficiary, he said. If you were never found, the company would pass to someone else. I turned the document toward me. The name written in soft cursive beneath mine sent a shiver through my entire body. Celeste. She knew, I whispered. She knew where Celeste was. She knew she might live without both of us. We flew back to the States with the documents locked in a steel briefcase. The moment we landed, Daniel contacted the federal case manager, turning over everything, the vault records, the company ownership, the secondary heir clause. And with it, the full weight of Julia's plan emerged. Victor hadn't just been hiding a secret heir. He had been trying to intercept a second fortune, one not tied to the Lennox estate, but built by Julia herself. As news of the Swiss vault reached the courts, the judge ordered a full extension of the inheritance trial. New assets meant new legal questions. But this time, the court wasn't suspicious. They were reverent. Julia's journals had been authenticated. The asylum records were now public. Victor's crimes were established. I was no longer the girl who needed to prove she belonged. I was the Lennox legacy. That night, I returned to Julia's old room in the estate. I placed the ring she left behind on the windowsill, where the moonlight caught its curve. I didn't wear it, not yet. Not until the story was finished. But I kept it close, like a promise. Like a warning. Later, Daniel and I met with the Lennox board. The room was silent as I entered. 11 men and women, all of them complicit in decades of silence, now forced to acknowledge the daughter they had tried to forget. I laid out the documents. The family trust is under federal review. The estate is mine by ruling. The biotech company Julia built is now privately controlled by me. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of change. They didn't argue. How could they? I was no longer a stranger in this house. I was its reckoning. But even as the board nodded in agreement, I felt it, the one shadow left unaccounted for. Celeste. The sister whose name was scribbled into secret pages, tied to offshore ownership, and now echoing through my life like a phantom. She's going to come forward, Daniel said, reading my thoughts as we left the boardroom. She'll have questions, I said. She'll also have claims, he added. I looked at him, voice low. And what if she doesn't come peacefully? Daniel didn't blink. Then you'll do what your mother prepared you to do. You'll fight. Back in my room, I unfolded the last of Julia's letters from the vault. It was different. Not a journal entry. Not a legal note. Just words from a mother who never stopped believing her daughters might someday find each other. Elena, if you ever meet her, show her the truth. Don't let them turn you against each other. But if she was raised in the shadows, be ready. Not every sister is made of light. I stared out the window, the ring gleaming in the moonlight beside me, and realized something heavy and true. My mother had built a kingdom in secret. She left me its throne. But she also left me its war. I had imagined her so many times. As a shadow, a whisper, a blood bond left drifting somewhere in the world with a face like mine and no memory of where it came from. But now that I knew Celeste was real, everything changed. She wasn't just an echo anymore, she was a living piece of the puzzle Julia had tried to preserve. And if the vault, the second inheritance clause, and the Swiss company all pointed to her, then it was only a matter of time before she stepped out of the dark. Daniel spent the next few days diving into the background trails connected to the secondary beneficiary name. We cross-checked Brindlewood's internal logs, traced obscure legal documents left behind by Julia, and followed whispers through adoption records that had been sealed for decades. Slowly, the smoke began to form into shape. She wasn't placed in a traditional adoption system, Daniel said, laying out a series of redacted documents. Julia must have arranged for her to be hidden. The paperwork was rerouted through a private legal firm in upstate New York, the same firm that oversaw several Brindlewood transactions. And you think she's still alive? I asked, afraid to speak the hope aloud. She's alive, he confirmed. And she's using the name Celeste Grant. She runs a private research initiative out of Seattle, something small, quiet, but funded. Likely with the money Julia funneled through that biotech company. So she knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to live behind the curtain, to stay out of the fight. Until now. We sent the first letter through the attorneys, careful and formal. No accusations, no claims. Just the facts, that we believed we shared a mother. That a journal had surfaced. That a company had named us both. And that I wanted to meet. For a week, there was nothing. Then, one morning, Daniel walked into the estate's study holding a single cream-colored envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in a script that looked eerily like Julia's, though sharper. Colder. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. The note was brief. I've known about you for longer than you've known about me. If you want to talk, we talk on equal ground. Not in your house. Not in your court. Come to me. If you can't handle that, we have nothing to say. No warmth. No sisterly invitation. Just challenge. She's testing you, Daniel said quietly. She's drawing her line before she steps into the light. I'm going to her, I said. She's the last part of Julia I haven't faced. 3 days later, I flew to Seattle. Alone. She met me at a private greenhouse built into the back of her research facility. It was the last place I expected, a sanctuary of light and life, full of rare medicinal plants and scent trails of lavender and mint. And then I saw her. She was tall, statuesque, with high cheekbones and deep-set eyes so familiar it hurt. She wore a white blouse and black trousers like armor. Her presence filled the space before she spoke a single word. You came, she said. I did. Celeste didn't reach for me. She didn't smile. But she studied me like a mirror she didn't trust. You were the daughter Julia remembered, she said softly. I was the one she tried to forget. My stomach dropped. That's not true. It is, she said. I read her letters. Her journals. Everything you found, I found long before you did. I've had her words in my hands for years. She was broken by the time I was born. They kept me from her. She never held me. Never looked at me. I was a secret, and I learned to survive like one. I took a breath, unsure of what to say. I didn't know you existed until a month ago. I know. But I knew about you. Her eyes narrowed. I watched your trial. I saw you tear down Victor. And I thought, maybe Julia was right to believe in you. Then help me finish it, I said. We're both her daughters. We both lost her. But we don't have to lose each other. She turned away and walked toward a glass table covered in botanical diagrams and research papers. I don't need your estate. I don't want your empire. But Julia's company, the one in Berlin? She built that for something bigger than inheritance. I've kept it alive because it mattered to her. Not for legacy, but for purpose. I stepped closer. Then we protect it together. Celeste looked at me again, this time with something flickering in her expression, not trust yet, but curiosity. Victor knew about me, she said. He found me years ago. Tried to manipulate me. Tried to convince me that Julia chose you over me. That I was the mistake. He lied to everyone, I said. But especially to us. There was silence for a moment. Then she said, if we do this together, it's on equal footing. You don't lead me. We stand side by side. I nodded. Agreed. She handed me a USB drive. This is everything I've collected on Victor's last hidden assets. Offshore partnerships, encrypted transactions, fake foundations. He was building something dangerous. Something Julia was trying to stop before she was institutionalized. My hands closed around it. We take it to the prosecutors. She gave a single nod. And then we see what comes next. When I flew back to the East Coast, I felt different. Not lighter, because there was still one final battle ahead. But steadier. I had found the missing half of Julia's legacy. And she wasn't a ghost. She was fire, wrapped in ice. As I walked back into the estate, Margaret stood at the top of the stairs, her face unreadable. You found her, she said. I did. Will she fight you? I thought for a moment, then answered, no. She'll fight with me. And that was when I realized the game had changed. The daughter they erased had returned. But now, the second one had stepped into the light. And the Lennox bloodline, the real one, was ready to burn the lie to the ground. The courtroom looked different the day Celeste walked in. Not physically, the benches were still polished wood, the flag still flanked the judge's bench, and the same scuffed tile stretched from wall to wall. But the air itself shifted. There was a new tension now, not of uncertainty, but of balance, two halves finally made whole, standing side by side, each carved from the same bloodline but shaped by completely different fires. Celeste wore black, sleek and precise, her expression unreadable. I saw how the board members turned to whisper as she entered. I saw how the attorneys leaned in, hungry for chaos, already imagining what it would mean if we turned against each other. But we didn't. We sat at the same table, shoulder to shoulder, and when the judge addressed the court, we both stood. Ms. Lennox and Ms. Grant, the judge said, as it pertains to the remaining assets of the Julia Lennox Foundation and the Berlin-based biotech firm registered under both your names, this hearing will determine the appropriate legal custodian moving forward. Do you stand together in this claim or as opponents? I looked at Celeste. She looked back at me. And for a single, silent second, everything that came before, the betrayal, the lies, the years apart, teetered on a knife's edge. Then she spoke. We stand together. As Julia's daughters. The courtroom broke into a flurry of whispers, but the judge raised a hand and silence returned. Very well. Proceed. What followed wasn't a trial, not in the traditional sense. It was more like a reckoning. Daniel presented the records of the Swiss account, the transfer of ownership, and Julia's original business filings. Celeste added her own evidence, correspondence Victor had attempted to destroy, files decrypted from old Brindlewood servers that detailed how Julia had tried to create a haven for her daughters long before either of us had the power to fight for ourselves. The final blow came from Celeste. She revealed a hidden trust Julia had created, one Victor never knew existed. It was funded through the biotech company and structured to ensure that neither daughter could claim full ownership unless both were alive and verified. In other words, we were bound. Julia had forced us into unity, even from beyond the grave. And it was the smartest thing she ever did. Victor wasn't there to witness it. His trial had moved to a federal court and he was awaiting sentencing in a high-security holding facility. But his lawyers, grim-faced and tight-lipped, sat in the back row, watching the family he tried to splinter seal itself back together. After court adjourned, Celeste and I stood in the marble atrium beneath the vaulted ceiling, sunlight pouring in through stained glass windows that looked far too beautiful for a building so full of war. So, what now? She asked, arms crossed. We run it, I said. The company. The foundation. Everything she left. Together. You trust me now? I'm learning to. She nodded once. Same. We returned to the estate later that afternoon, where Margaret waited for us in the sunroom. She had aged more in the last 2 months than in the last 2 years, but her eyes were clear and dry. I was afraid of this moment, she admitted, looking at both of us. Not because of who you are, but because of what I allowed myself to forget. I let Victor take too much. I looked away when I should have fought. I let fear rule me. You're not alone in that, I said. Celeste stepped forward. We're not here to punish you. But we're not here to forget either. Margaret nodded. Then take it all. The board. The assets. The power. Make it mean something. Make it right. We did. Within the next week, we assumed full control of the Julia Lennox Foundation and restructured the Berlin company to operate as a global nonprofit. We fired the board members who had protected Victor. We opened every ledger, unsealed every archive, and turned the spotlight on every corner of the legacy that had once been used to silence us. And yet, it wasn't victory I felt as I signed the final papers. It was weight. Because inheritance is never just about what's given, it's about what must be carried. Celeste and I stood in Julia's old room one last time, each of us holding one of her journals. There were gaps between us still, not just in memory, but in instinct. I had grown up starving for truth. She had grown up hiding from it. But we both wanted the same thing now. To protect what she had built. To ensure no one could ever erase us again. Outside, the media waited. The world wanted a press conference. A statement. A soundbite. But we didn't give them one. Instead, we walked out hand in hand, two heirs no longer competing for space, but claiming it, unapologetically. In the final envelope Julia had left in the vault, there was one last line. Legacy is not what you inherit. It's what you choose to become when no one is watching. And now, we were becoming everything they tried to bury. Not because they handed it to us. But because we unearthed it with our own blood. It's strange how quiet it gets after war ends. The courtroom doors closed. The cameras disappeared. The media moved on to shinier scandals, newer headlines. And yet I remained, standing in the ruins of a life that never should have been broken to begin with. The estate was finally mine, not just in legal terms, but in spirit. Every inch of it now breathed with the truth. The halls no longer whispered lies. The shadows didn't hide ghosts. Julia's name was no longer a secret carved into the margins of paperwork. It was engraved into everything that mattered. Victor was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The charges stacked high and hit hard: fraud, falsified medical records, illegal confinement, conspiracy to commit identity theft. He never looked at me during the sentencing. Not once. Maybe because he couldn't bear the weight of losing. Maybe because, deep down, he finally knew who I was. And who I wasn't. The fake sister, Mira, entered witness protection. I never saw her again, but sometimes I imagined what her life might be like now, far away from the game she was used in, maybe rebuilding from scratch. I didn't forgive her, but I didn't hate her either. We were both used. The difference was I fought back. As for Celeste, she stayed. Not as a rival. Not as a threat. But as my sister. It wasn't always easy. We had hard conversations. Nights of silence. Disagreements about direction and legacy and how to lead. But we never let it divide us again. Julia had forced us into the same bloodline. But it was our choice to become family. And we did. Together, we turned the Lennox Foundation into something real. We funded medical grants, restructured the pharma pipeline to include orphan diseases, and dismantled the exploitation practices Victor had put in place. And the Berlin biotech company? We renamed it. JL and Daughters. Julia's initials. Our bond. One day, I visited her grave, no longer a cross behind an asylum, but a polished stone under sunlight in the family mausoleum where she belonged. I knelt, pressed my palm to the marble, and whispered everything she never got to hear. We did it, Mom. You gave us the blueprint. We built it all from your ink, your blood, your silence. They tried to erase you. But now, your name is louder than theirs ever was. I wore the ring she left me that day. It fit perfectly. And now when people ask me who I am, I no longer say Elena Monroe. I say, Elena Lennox. Daughter of Julia. Heir to a dynasty they tried to steal. And builder of a legacy they'll never destroy. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have walked away, or burned them down? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear what happened when we uncovered Julia's final secret in the sealed Lennox vault.